Well, my name is Peter Burke, and I've been in this serving people in this career transition arena for now the better part of 10 years. And about 10 years ago, when I felt this calling from God to serve people in this arena, in my typical type A fashion, I went out and interviewed 200 people. I visited every job networking meeting known to man to really figure out what's missing, where I belong, what do people go through in this career transition process, and kind of selfishly, what can I do to help? And I get asked all the time, if you were to narrow down kind of the top lessons learned, what would those be? And how can we help people who are going through this journey? So I'm going to share with you those 9 top lessons learned. The first one is reduce expenses. Now the average family who, one of the breadwinners in the family ends up being unemployed, their first reaction is, it won't be that long. We'll get a job not very long. We don't want to worry the kids. Let's just keep on keeping on. And one of the big lessons I've learned is the smartest people in this career transition arena don't wait. Because you don't know if it's going to be 2 weeks or 5 weeks, or the average I heard this morning today is 40 weeks for somebody who becomes unemployed at this moment. I know some people who have been unemployed for 4 years. Can you imagine how much better they'd feel if 2.5 or 3 years ago they would have been really aggressive about reducing their expenses in this process? Because you sleep better at night, your savings certainly last a lot longer. It's just a smart thing to do. The second kind of key lesson learned is I always call the spouse your secret weapon. And one of the things I found in the research that I did is when a couple ends up having some kind of career transition between the two of them, if you have little fractures in your marriage, it can become a chasm. And quite honestly, when a marriage ends up with a chasm, neither party really operates in the rest of life as well as they could if they were well connected. So for a lot of different reasons, I would tell you that during career transition, do everything you can to try to reinvest in the marriage, as opposed to allow fear and trepidation and all the things that tend to kind of creep in when you're in career transition. The other huge advantage of kind of thinking about your spouse as your secret weapon is, in many, many cases, your spouse may be the extroverted one, may have significantly more relationships, has the ability to kind of share with a whole bunch of other people that you're in transition and could use some help with networking or encouragement or whatever it may be. And if we don't take advantage of that great asset, then again, I think it makes the whole transition journey more difficult. The third one, I call it the 3-foot rule. Now, you have to know the average person who's in transition, for a lot of reasons, some of which I can't explain and some of which I think I understand fully, has a tendency to try to keep it a secret, okay? And it's probably the worst possible career transition strategy you can employ. Let me give you an example of the 3-foot rule. My contention is, if you're anywhere, anytime, and you're within 3 foot of anybody you meet, you should tell them that you're in career transition. Now, the reason the average person doesn't do that is actually more built on pride than it is anything else. Because we're either embarrassed that we're in transition and don't want to explain why we're not. We don't want to impose on people. I don't want to worry with them with my problems. And the reality is, I can tell you so many stories of people who have met somebody at an Atlanta bread company or at a movie theater, and they just happened to mention, or somebody overheard that they were unemployed. Well, guess what? That's one way that God puts people in our path. So I think we've got to encourage people to actually be forthright and not keep these things a secret. A fourth one is what I call Marketing 101. I think job transition, and I got to tell you, there's probably a lot of people a lot smarter about the ins and outs of interviewing and resumes and those kinds of things. I can just tell you that what I've seen to be most effective is somebody who kind of takes a 3-phase classic marketing approach. First, you got to be really clear about what you want to do. And the average job seeker isn't. They'll have a tendency to say, boy, if I cast a really wide net, then I have a better chance of somebody actually liking something that I said, sales or customer service, or I once met an engineer, or whatever it may be, right? So casting a wide net doesn't work. You have to be clear and pretty concise about what it is you're looking for. The second thing in this category is to be proactive about targeting companies. There's kind of a two disparate approaches. One is you can be opportunistic and reactive and spend most of your time on the job boards and hope a job finds you, or you can target specific companies, and I would argue there's probably more opportunities, and literally more than half of the people in the United States today work in small and medium companies as opposed to Fortune 1000 companies. But find target companies that have a need for what you're really good at, and then approach those proactively through your network contacts, through LinkedIn, through Facebook, you name it. There's lots of ways you can get to those organizations. And here's the final thought on Marketing 101. As opposed to hoping that they have a job opening, I've always had this philosophy that I don't want any job openings, because job openings are a little bit like stock tips. When there's a job opening, that means 30,000 of your closest friends in the city of Atlanta or wherever you may be have heard about that same job, may or may not have better qualifications. I've always believed if you can find a company that's typically would have a need for your skill set, and you can figure out how to network in and have at least an initial meeting with a hiring manager in that organization, regardless of whether they have a job opening, when they fall in love with you, great hiring managers will find a way to get you in the organization. Because in many cases, if they've got 10 or 12 direct reports, there's probably a couple of those that are fairly deficient. And they're going to find ways to replace those deficient performers with somebody who's got the kind of skills and the kind of attitude that you have. So let me keep going. The next one is have a plan. Another way to say that is don't wing it. And here's what I mean by that. It's fascinating to me to compare and contrast working people with those that are unemployed. When you're a working person, you wake up on Monday morning and you have a clear view of your priorities, you have established a schedule to be able to achieve those priorities, you know what your goals and metrics are, in fact you probably even know what your manager's expectations are, and then you execute the plan in the course of the week. The average person in job transition doesn't. They wake up on Monday morning and they say, gosh, I wonder what will happen this week. And the fact is, somebody in transition has a full-time job. It's just not a paid job. But we have to be just as diligent, we have to be just as planful, we have to really know what we're going to do, why we're going to do it, and how we're going to spend our time. And that's usually a missing component of the equation. The next one, I call it there's a new normal. And here's what I mean by a new normal. When I started with IBM 30 plus years ago, there was kind of a mentality that we're all kind of, when you get a job, you're going to have a job for the rest of your life and you're going to get full benefits and a pension someday. Well, I got news for you. The whole world has changed, and it's changed fairly quickly in the last 15 years particularly. And here's my message specifically. I read something 2 weeks ago that says by the year 2020, of the total 145 million workers in the United States, 70 million of those workers, almost half, will be independent contractors. They'll be part-time, they'll be contractors, 1099 consultants. My big message here is, if you're working with somebody who's looking for work, and all they're looking for is full-time, fully benefited, long-term employment kinds of things, you're probably missing out on half of the opportunities in the marketplace. And I think that's a half of the marketplace I wouldn't want to miss if I were in transition. The next one, attitude is everything. I'll tell you what, job search can beat us down. It is demoralizing. In many cases, it's downright depressing. It's easy to feel defeated. I've worked with people who have 25 years, highly successful, highly accomplished, really, VP level people, director, you name it. And I've oftentimes pondered how in the world, in the course of 3 or 4 weeks after a 25-year career, can they entirely lose their self-confidence? And it's not because they aren't capable, it's because the mind is a dangerous thing. And we get kind of locked in our basement or in our office at home, and we start questioning, gosh, I wonder if I was as successful as I thought I was. I wonder if I had a lot of people fooled, and maybe the real me, kind of the defeated me and the not so successful me, is actually now arrived and coming out. And my point is, if we allow that mental game to kind of take over, it's really hard to be effective in job transition, because hiring managers and networking contacts, they can read our attitude from a mile away. And so one of the key things we've got to get everybody to understand is we got to get that self-talk, the talk track that's the opposite talk track, that says, let me remind you. In fact, one of the exercises I oftentimes give is take out an 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper that's blank on both sides, and your task for the next 2 hours is to write down every accomplishment everything you've accomplished in the last X number of years. And you need to remind yourself how capable you are and how much you're able to contribute to a new organization. Because without that, you won't interview well and you won't get the job you really want. Two more. The second to last one is, and you can imagine I feel pretty strongly about this one, is don't walk alone. When I told you I started this journey, I interviewed a whole bunch of people. And one of the things I found in those interviews is there's one major kind of emotion that tends to take over for people in transition, and that is one of being alone. It feels like it's me against the world. In fact, when I reach out to all of my friends who are actually employed and I'm trying to get network contacts and get advice and counsel and send my resume, in many cases they don't even respond to me. And it's not because they don't like us, it's because they're busy and they get consumed with day-to-day life. So the reason we started the Christ-Centered Career Group ministry almost 10 years ago and have served literally thousands of people over the last 10 years is to try to specifically address that issue. Because I believe God's design, and it says it in Ecclesiastes 4, that a cord of 3 strands is not easily broken. When we walk alone, it's really easy to kind of defeat us because of the things I talked about a minute ago. When we come together as the body of Christ and we get people to surround themselves with people who love the Lord and want to serve each other, we can provide encouragement to each other, we can pray for each other, we can provide accountability, right? Sometimes a little kick of accountability isn't bad either. Open our Rolodex to our friends and neighbors, and really that's what C3G is fully intended to serve, is to get people to stop walking alone in life and in transition and start walking with a group of people who care. And the last one I will tell you, and it's not the last in terms of priority, perhaps it's the first one, is we've got to keep God at the center of this journey. Real quickly on my personal story, I'm a workaholic, very type A, never met a job I didn't like. And I was one of these that was fully consumed and overly zealous about my work, at the expense of a whole bunch of other things, not the least of which was my relationship with God. And God was kind of compartmentalized for me. And what I've learned over time is when we're rocking and rolling and things are going really good in the work environment, we don't have a lot of time for God. And one of the interesting things I guess I've learned in this process is when we go through crises, in this case, career transition, it's God's special way to get our attention. Or as somebody said to me recently, we never look up until we're knocked on our back. And that's effectively what I found about career transition is if you know somebody who's going through transition or if you're going through career transition, this is probably the perfect time for you to stop and pause and ask the question, Lord, what is it you want me to learn in this process? Is it you trying to reach me because you couldn't get my attention when I was overly preoccupied with work? And you have to know, I pray a lot for people to find work. I pray a lot more for people to find Christ in this process. So those are just some quick tips. I hope they're helpful, and I appreciate the opportunity to share.